I think it was Voltaire who said, you know, if they can get you to believe absurdities, they can get you to commit atrocities. That's what it is. See, it's just so absurd on the face of it. There's no possibility that all of that evil, that poison in the society could be leached in one generation. No doing it. There will be a need for affirmative action long after this spirit has gone elsewhere, if there's elsewhere to go. It's going to be yet a number of generations, certainly, before that particular poison, those particular errors, deep errors, have been eliminated from this society. You can't undo those 300 years in 30. But they're telling us it's not just that all of that has been, whatever was legitimate in your complaints, it's not just that all that's been undone. So far has it been undone that any prolongation of those programs will only harm the poor, benighted white male. A bizarre idea when you look above the glass ceiling. Very bizarre idea. And if they can get people to believe that, then we are in serious trouble. And you see, they can organize with their great resources, their great material resources, simply on the basis of appeal to prejudice and fear. We, however, with much more limited material resources, actually have to help re-educate people. Organizing from our side requires moral re-education as much as anything else. It is very difficult to do, but not impossible. Now, I said there is a unity of issues. We saw it in the California elections, these last terrible elections. It wasn't just Proposition 187 scapegoating the most exploited people that don't even make the stack as far as citizenship is concerned, earning here when they do below minimum wage. Okay. It wasn't just that. Okay. The worst of the worst was Proposition 184. Proposition 184 is a 3 strikes and you're out proposition. Doesn't mean 3 strikes of violent crime. Any felony will do. Any felony will do. And of course, in a society where the property is theft, right? This is our society, okay? In that society where property rules, naturally, lots of crimes against property, even minor ones, will do. Okay, what's going to happen? Right now, as I think Percy said, we are spending as much on incarceration as on education. Okay. Under the regime of Proposition 184, incarceration will steadily pull ahead. Okay? Guaranteed. Well, we're talking about people, the people on the other side, their unified vision, their scapegoating vision, scapegoating the people coming across the border, scapegoating the people that are not willing to provide an education to. We're talking about people whose mentality is this refined. Throw them in jail. Even though it costs less to give them an education, throw them in jail. This is the law enforcement approach to every social problem. This is crude. We are talking about people who are indeed coarse. And this is why, when Willie Brown was asked, what, you're going to debate 2 of them? 2 against 1 seems a little fair. Willie Brown answered, well, no, it's really 1 to 0. And of course, he was right. He was right. Although I don't think I would have been able to come up with it so quickly, boy. 1 to 0. Okay, now, check this out, all right? It is a law enforcement approach to every social problem. And they only notice a social problem when it has achieved the level of law enforcement. When people have taken out guns, when they're shooting one another, then they notice, oh, we have a problem. And at that point, what's the solution? Throw them in jail. We are talking people with with less than sophistication. And notice, it's a pattern, not just one proposition. A set of propositions, not just one candidate. A set of public figures. There's Newt, there's Phil Graham, there's Jesse Helms, there's a person who has reinvented opportunism, namely our own Pete Wilson. There's a whole set of them, okay? That is one pole. And therefore, in order to be successful, we need to establish a counter pole. We need to establish an alternative vision in public to counter that vision. Every chance we have to debate them, we take. Quasi Harris and I are going to be at City College of San Francisco during the summer debating Custard, and we don't know who else. And there's a nice story attached to that. One of the organizers of that particular forum said to Custard, you know, you might try for a woman or a person of color. Silence. Silence. We don't know who the second person is going to be. Well, every chance we get, we need to engage. We need to be more coherent than they are, okay? We need to be clearer with not only the clarity of intelligence, but the clarity of moral commitment, so that there is no question at all, when the votes come, what people are voting for. People mustn't vote for that initiative thinking, it's for civil rights. People mustn't be permitted that luxury. And we are the ones who need to be sure they don't have that particular luxury. Now, with the objective of meeting this set of issues and this set of personalities by a counter set of issues, by a unified vision, some of us decided we needed an organization that extended beyond one campus. And so while this is not about that, I do want to say, and I think it's reasonable to say, some of us have been organizing the campus coalitions for human rights and social justice. It's a real moniker, so I just call it the campus coalitions. We've already gotten to about 12 campuses. We've had meetings involving representatives from those campuses. We need to go further. How many are there? The world does not begin and end in Berkeley, my friends. We turned out more people at Sonoma State than are sitting here, I have to tell you, and that's not an insult, it should be an incentive. Okay. There are 10 UC, only one UC Berkeley. There are 10 UC campuses. There are 20 CSU campuses. I teach at one of them. There are about 200 public community college campuses. That's where the folks are. We need to reach as many of those campuses as possible. We need to have movements on them, and from those places can go out those people who can talk to their parents, to their brothers, to their sisters, and get them to vote in a way that speaks intelligence and compassion, and therefore defeats the so-called civil rights initiative before we have to go back and be strong in the streets. And so it's really important, I feel, to extend that organization to as many of those campuses as possible, beginning now, continuing in the fall. I work from meeting to meeting. The first meeting was large, the second meeting was larger, but will we be here in the fall? It depends upon the workers on every single campus. And that, I want to be quite clear, this is not an elbowing people aside idea. On campuses where there are organized oppositions to these various initiatives from the right, those are the initiatives that we want to support. On campuses where they don't exist, we can help build them. We can help people do the things they would do naturally and help coordinate their efforts. I now would like to focus a little bit on the solution, as I see it. Thank you. The solution to the so-called affirmative action problem. because there is a problem. The problem is we are right now in a mild depression. And it's going to go on for a long time. What happens under those circumstances? There is U.S. history. The labor history of the United States can be understood very clearly as a history of inter-ethnic conflict over too small a pie. There is only one way that I can see to move into the future without the white males fighting everybody else for king of the mountain. And that requires a great expansion of social investment in healthcare, education, employment. We are right now going in the opposite direction, and we are not starting from a good place. The United States has the steepest income and wealth gradient of any comparable country in the world, and instead of just telling it to you, don't believe me, was in it was an article printed in the Chronicle, reprinted from the New York Times, April 17. You can look it up. I suggest you do. The article was written by Keith Bradsher, reprinted from the New York Times, documenting it. We are the worst in that particular department. We have to become much, much better. We have to expand the pool of resources in healthcare, education, and jobs so that there is enough for everyone. We don't have to say, sorry, Pedro, it's either your kid or mine. No. We can have enough of all those things for everyone, provided we have a greatly expanded social investment budget. And where does it have to come from? Well, what are the rich for? You see, what is the excuse for rich people? There is, in fact, an excuse, okay? The rationale for rich people is they invest our money wisely. Well, they're not investing it wisely. Pink slip time. Pink slip time. We have to do some of the investing ourselves. It's as simple as that. And if we expand that pool of resources, then we don't have to fight over the bones. That, as I see it, is the only solution available to us, and we've got to go for it. I would like to conclude by asking you, please, give money too. Write checks. And if you do that, please, if you write checks, for example, to campus coalitions for human rights and social justice, we will split the money so as to defray, in part, the cost of this undertaking today and also the expansion to other campuses. So, and we have very low overhead, I guarantee. Thank you very much.
Our last speaker, but definitely not the least, Professor Ron Takaki from Asian American Studies. He did have to teach and came back, and he has to be put a little later on the agenda, so it's not an indication of any slight disrespect, hopefully. So Professor Ron Takaki from Asian American Studies, he's been an outspoken on the issue of affirmative action and civil rights for quite some time, and it's a pleasure to have him here. Ron Takaki.
First of all, I'd like to say that I'm glad to see some familiar faces out there in the audience. The theme of this conference is excellence in diversity. And you know, like a professor, I started asking questions. What do we mean by excellence? And what do we mean by diversity? And how are the two related to one another? And I'd like to try to answer these questions by telling you a story. Some of my students know I like to tell stories in my lectures and also in my books. Well, in 1989, this faculty at Berkeley did something quite amazing. Some of you may have been there when we had that meeting across the plaza. We voted affirmatively to establish a multicultural requirement for graduation called the American Cultures Requirement. I can remember walking out of the vote, and the students were there saying, right on, But, and now, this requirement has become like, a feather in the cap of the University of California at Berkeley. In fact, Michael Heyman, who was then our chancellor and who is now the secretary of the Smithsonian, proudly boasts that American cultures requirement is one of his shining achievements while he was chancellor here at Berkeley. And I laugh because he caved into the veterans recently, in terms of the Enola Gay exhibit controversy. But I have to make a confession. Initially, the Berkeley faculty did not want to approve the proposal for a requirement. And what happened was this. In 1987, for the first time in the history of this university, students of color totaled 52% of the undergraduate population. And we have a faculty that's 90% white. Imagine the faculty showing up on campus, fall of 1987, walking into their classrooms, looking out at their students, and saying, whoa, something's different here. Like affirmative action was working. It had diversified the student community here. And these students began to question us as faculty. They said, look, we're having trouble in the dormitories, we're having difficulties in the dining halls relating to one another. They're saying, educate us. They said, is this or is this not a university? I said, what do you mean? And they said, isn't a university supposed to be a place where you study the universe, the physical universe, and also the social universe? And look at this social universe. It's a racially, culturally diverse universe. Educate us. And the students came up with this idea, a requirement, a multicultural requirement for graduation. What did the faculty do? Well, Berkeley faculty. They said no. Initially, they were very dismissive. They said, we know what you need to learn. You need to learn Western civilization. And the students said, fine, teach us Shakespeare, teach us Melville. Western civilization is part of American society. But American society includes cultures from other parts of the world. Teach us about this reality called the United States of America. And the faculty said no. So what did the students do? Well, Berkeley students, it all started with you, Mario, They began to hold demonstrations and rallies on the steps of Sproul Hall, demanding that the faculty institute a requirement to make us multiculturally literate. Faculty said no. So what the Berkeley students did? They began to occupy buildings. And one of the buildings they occupied was the faculty club. That elegant building, that rustic-looking building in that lovely clay, And at that point, the movement was not a very large movement, And I know it was not large because I was the faculty chair of this student faculty coalition. Okay. And maybe only 5, 6, maybe 11 students would show up at our meetings, and we got depressed, of course, But we decided that we were committed to the transformation of the university. And so the students decided to take the faculty club. And if you've ever been in this faculty club, and I think some of you have been in there, it's an easy building to occupy because there's this narrow hallway leading to the sandwich lines. Okay? So the students, and there were only about 15 to maybe 25 of them who were prepared for what they call an action. Action. They were going to take faculty club, they were going to clog that line. They were going to say to the faculty, you can't eat unless you educate us in all of our diversity. So about 10 minutes to 12, students went in there, about 15, 18 of them went in there, put their bodies across that hallway. And then faculty began to show up at 12 o'clock, and they had to literally walk over these bodies, okay? And some of them got angry. And one of them, a very conservative professor, I won't tell you from what department, started shouting at the students. He said, you can take your multicultural proposal and shove it up your, and he said it. Well, these students were taking good notes, So anyway, the next day when the students found out, about what had happened, students got pretty upset. They said to the faculty, look, you can disagree with us intellectually, but do not insult us. Okay? And this exploded, became a burning issue on this campus. And many of you can still remember, those huge meetings that we held. In fact, we held a meeting right here, and 2,000 people were there, And Hatem got the message and realized that we needed to prepare this university in terms of its curriculum for the 21st century. A 2-year debate was launched, and finally in 1989, the American Cultures Requirement was established. Well, what lessons can we learn from this history? Now, don't say, when you walk out of this room, Professor Takaki said we should take the faculty club, Yeah, I am just a historian, according to what happened here. But what lessons can we learn? Well, one lesson that I've learned from the students is that it doesn't take a whole lot of students to build a mass movement. There were only, as I said, 6 to 8 of us that met, about every 2 weeks to organize these demonstrations and these faculty and these takeovers. So I was not part of the planning of the takeovers, of course. I'm just a faculty member. But it didn't take a whole lot of students. 15 of them took that faculty club. But what it is that it created media attention. Okay, media attention. And all of a sudden, the issue was raised. Okay, if it's not in the Daily Gazette, it didn't happen. You see, if it's not on television, it didn't happen. So these students were media savvy. So, a lesson that we can learn here is that it doesn't take a whole lot of us, but it takes some of us who are committed for an action. Okay? And this brings me, to 3 questions that I'd like to ask. And, I'd like to ask, first of all, Angie Fa a question. Angie said that she's going to organize an effort to collect 1 million signatures to support affirmative action. I'm just wondering whether or not, that would be simply a symbolic gesture, you see. I wonder if we shouldn't use those signatures, actually, to initiate a counter proposition, you see. A proposition that would make constitutional affirmative action. Why can't we have 2 propositions on the ballot? Let the people of California then decide, which is the real civil rights proposition. I think we would waste it if we simply asked people to sign this petition, okay? Unless it's connected to something that's going to happen at the ballot. And this brings me then to a question for Mario Savio. Mario said, if we don't succeed at the ballot box, then we will be strong in the streets. And I'm just wondering, Mario, whether or not we have it backwards, whether or not we need to be strong in the streets before the ballot box so that we win at the ballot box. I think that's what we learned about the civil rights struggle, with all those marches and so forth. We had to be in the streets of Montgomery and Birmingham and so forth before the Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And finally, I'd like to ask the students a question. This university has done an analysis, what they call a projection analysis of the composition of our student body if affirmative action were abolished. I told you what affirmative action did in 1987. It brought the minority into the majority of our student population. So the university has done these projection analyses. What if this proposition passes? What will be the impact in terms of the ethnic composition of the UC student body? They project that if this proposition passes, 97% of the Berkeley student body will be Asian and white. 3% will be African American and Latino. And the question I want to ask the students is this: is that the kind of university you want? Is that the kind of university the people of California really want? Now let me say this, that's not the kind of university I want to be teaching at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have some time for questions. If anybody would like to take questions. So I would say that Mario and Angie, if you want to answer to that question, and then we'll open it to the floor. You could come up to the microphone and ask the question to any member of the panel.
I'd actually like to respond to that in the following way, that part of organizing people to vote their real interests is making a real public splash. That is, in other words, a real identifiable alternative. And so if that's what we mean by being in the streets before the election, very well and good. We don't want to freak them out. That's exactly what the other side wants to have happen. That's exactly what the other side is hoping for. We actually want to encourage people to vote intelligently, which is not what they did the last time. I was referring instead to what, unfortunately, might well happen if the thing passes. If the thing passes, then we are, in a sense, back to square one. And then it's not just a question of making a public appearance in the streets. It's a question of, once again, investing the institutions that are not hiring the people that they should be hiring, for example, or not admitting the people they should be admitting. And that's the kind of struggle which may be necessary, and that's what I had in mind. I certainly was not suggesting that one would very quietly encourage people to vote their interests. We have to be very, very public so that people know that there is an alternative vision in this society. So there's really no disagreement, I think.
Ron, that's a very important question, and I myself go back and forth on this. The coalition of organizations which are going to be doing the campaign have examined whether or not if you do an official initiative gathering effort or whether you do something that's symbolic. I guess the fundamental problem that I have, though, with a statewide initiative is twofold. One is that my rights, I don't feel comfortable putting them up for a vote statewide and say that whether or not it's something that a majority of Californians want to give me is something or not I should have. It's especially pressing because the Democrats, in order to win statewide in the presidential election, are actually considering doing that. They're considering taking my right to reproductive freedom. And they're thinking, well, let's make an initiative out of this. Now, they aren't thinking, let's do it in order to guarantee me my rights. I could actually lose my rights in that effort. The reason why they're thinking about making reproductive rights an initiative is that it would get out the kind of voters that they want to bring out. And so philosophically, I'm uncertain about how I feel about putting my rights out to a vote in the initiative process. And as we all know, the initiative process in California has more often than not been used to deny people things than it has been to give them certain things. What I mean by this is the initiative process has been the process by which things like fair housing laws have been challenged. It's the process by which Alien land laws have been passed that prevented people of color from owning land. There are all kinds of very negative things that the electorate have voted through the initiative process. And I'm not certain that I want my rights up for a vote. What I do want to make sure is that we have a vehicle for going out and talking with every person about taking a stand in support of affirmative action. And I want to make sure that we have a big enough showing for affirmative action and for our side, and that we build a strong enough organization that we can win the initiative for affirmative action, and we can go on and win the next 6 initiatives, whatever they be for, and we can use that same infrastructure to go on and build support for workers' rights, for peace and justice, and building the kind of society that we want. On a totally pragmatic level, I also want to say that it's substantially harder to get a yes vote on an initiative than it is a no vote. There's a certain percentage of the electorate, and you have to factor it in, that votes no on all the ballot initiatives. They're so fed up with everything that's on there, they go through and check off no. And so you have to start off, in order to win an initiative, with thinking that you are going into it with about 75% or more, I think, of the electorate that is going to be for you, because you're going to lose a certain amount. And according to the polling data right now, I'm scared in terms of where we are. I think that we can defeat an initiative. I am not convinced that in the time that we've got, I know that in our lifetimes, we're going to be able to build the kind of momentum we need to, so that we've got a 75% public majority in support of affirmative action and civil rights. But I don't think that it's going to be here with us in the short time between now and either March or November of '96. And I don't want to put my rights up for a vote and be part of the state constitution, where it's very difficult to amend except through another initiative process or through the courts.
I really support Ron Takaki's recommendations on both of them. And simply because if we don't have a second initiative there, then we're dealing with one and we're trying to have the same argument. Having a second one is going to force people to say, well, what's the difference between this and this other one? And I think it has to be very clear that even though they call it Civil Rights Initiative, it's anti-Civil Rights Initiative, and that would be the reason why we have to have a second one. So at all sides you have very clearly 2 groups with different opinions, regardless of what you call them, but it does force a lot of discussion in the news media, even if nothing else, just to try to clarify the difference between the 2 initiatives. I agree with Angie's comment. I wish that we wouldn't have to go that approach. But I think if we don't have a second one, then we are arguing in their turf, their questions, and a lot of people don't listen to a lot of that information. The second one, going to the streets, I don't see how else they're going to take us seriously, because as far as I'm concerned, we're going to win this war. There's no question about it. The issue is when and how much it's going to cost. But we don't have affirmative action because somebody wanted to give it to us. Affirmative action was won piece by piece, and simply because they found that they had to make changes. And so even if they take it away from us, we will have affirmative action. You may call it something differently. The issue is it's going to take 2 years, 3 years, and how much it's going to cost before people realize